And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest from the other side of the pond, as they like to say, is Rita Clifton. She has been called the brand guru by the Financial Times and the doyen of branding by Campaign Magazine. Her career has included being a vice chairman and strategy director at Saatchi & Saatchi, as the London CEO and chairman at the global brand consultancy Interbrand, and as a co-founder of BrandCap. She also has a new book out, which is kind of cool, which is Love Your Imposter, Be Your Best Self, Flaws and All. And I can tell you from my many years doing what I'm doing, inevitably in 8 out of 10 relationships I have with a client, the imposter syndrome thing comes up, and it's usually, let me tell you a little secret. So I'm really, really interested to talk about that. So anyway, welcome aboard, Rita. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much for having me too. That imposter thing, as you say, I mean, it's become so common that it just begins to feel like a syndrome of being human, you know? So 70% of people suffer from it. As you say, sometimes they think it's a secret, it's just them that has it. But the more and more you go into this, the more you find that so many successful people who really should be enjoying their success are still beating themselves up.
Well, that's the ironic part is, how do I say this without, screw it. I'll just say it, right? Stupid people never say, wow, everyone around me must think I'm stupid. And then you'd be like, of course they do. You're an idiot, right? It's usually the brightest and the most talented and the most accomplished that go, geez, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel good enough. And it's how do we get the stupid people to, I guess then it wouldn't be imposter syndrome. It would be truth syndrome.
Well, I think it's really interesting, because I think what's fundamentally important in any work that we do on ourselves, either professionally or personally, first and foremost, for goodness sake, understand yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't understand what drives you, what your strengths are, what you need to do, and so on, if you're not careful, you get your personal stuff that can be dark or challenging or whatever,
sure,
and keep on visiting that on all the people around you. And that can sometimes contaminate your relationships or your management team, or whatever. So it's really, really important, in my view anyway, to understand yourself.
And this, great. Thank you.
And this imposter thing, it's one of those things where, as you say, a lot of very accomplished, successful people talk about their imposter, people you'd never imagine, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Tom Hanks, you can't move for celebrities talking about this. And of course, they all think they're going to get fired any minute, and that they're not going to be good enough, or, whatever. Right. And then you go, do you know, this has become a really useful drive for so many people to improve, to stretch yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Try more. And I think you need to make friends with your friend or foe imposter and go, thank you. I know why you're there, and you're going to make me try harder and do more.
So let's talk about the journey a little bit, because when I look at your sort of CV, it's clearly branding, marketing, advertising at the highest levels. And that was a path that you did well. There's a nonprofit piece to what you do in terms of boards that you've sat on, et cetera. How did you land on imposter as a thing and then commit to writing a book and the thought leadership? Because that seems a bit non-linear, which is fairly common as well.
I was going to say human life, I think we can safely say, is pretty non-linear anyway, isn't it? But I think you get to an age and stage where you just begin to think, I can help other people better by being honest about so much of the stuff that we can maybe either obscure or hide or whatever day to day. And if there are 2 reasons why I wrote this book, I mean, number one is we must make business feel more human for so many reasons. In the digital world, if you're not human on the inside, if you're pretending to be smiley on the outside, people will find you out with the scale and the speed that will take your breath away. And the other thing, of course, about being human is that actually business is got a problem. Business has got an image problem. Many Hollywood villains, alien.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if someone just put your CV in front of me and said, she's writing a book, what might it be titled or what would it be about? I'd probably put it in the branding, Martin Lindstrom, consumer behavior. I would make an assumption and say, she's clearly top of her game in that space. That's probably what I would expect she would be writing about and what the market would want to hear from her. This is a total departure, right? Because imposter syndrome, there are academics that study this, there's psychologists that study this. They're, usually not CEOs of world-renowned ad agencies.
Yeah, well, funny you should say that. I mean, I believe you can use some of the principles from brand building in the commercial sector, the broader sector, and apply them to yourself. And they can be really useful tools to give you more confidence to win with this imposter syndrome thing. Because we have big feelings that could be common across any industry, any occupation, actors, suffering, business leaders, people in all sorts of fields have it. And so therefore you think, what are going to be the tools and principles that I uniquely or personally can help with that will maybe be useful to people more broadly? And the tools that I've learned from brand strategy, from brand building, clarity about what you stand for, what drives you, what you really want. Secondly, coherence about how you make sure that shows up through everything you do, your skills, your knowledge, your behavior. Yes, of course, your personal presentation and communication. Sure. And thirdly is about leadership. That's leading your own brand, symbolizing, what you want to be, but also renewing and refreshing, finding new things, staying nosy. We all need to stay relevant and current. These are relevant to all of us, whether or not you're working in branding or you're working in industrial sectors or non-profit or whatever. These are common principles.
So let me ask you this then. It sounds like on some level, the crossover from your career into this, you might sum it up in this way, or you might not, right? Is old school personal branding is how you have the exterior, how you present to the universe, right? I am smart, I am funny, I am helpful, I am whatever, right? But embracing or getting your head around the imposter syndrome piece is really the internal side of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point and a good insight. And frankly, I spent a lot of my career trying to stop people from thinking that branding is somehow just the name and the logo and the design and packaging and so on.
Wear the yellow suspenders or something.
Exactly. You just go, what makes good branding work and has always made it work is the substance that lie beneath. You can't fool all people all the time. If you've got a rubbish product, no matter how lovely the wrapping, it's not going to work. And it's the same with individuals. I think, or most of us anyway, can think of times in our working lives where we have been acting a part. Somehow as a corporate construct, I think I was doing that when I was chief executive. I thought that, there was a way of being a chief executive, chewing concrete blocks for breakfast, and generally, as I say, being CEO.
Yeah.
I think that the world has changed. Maybe we talk a bit more about that. You've got to be more human to have relationships, long-term relationships with people, and so on. So I think we often make the mistake of acting a part, and that's exactly sometimes from the commercial world of branding, it applies to yourself. It's the substance that lies beneath. It's your skills, your experience, your knowledge, your drive. And clearly the visible bits need to do justice to that. That's just like saying, you wouldn't say to a client, you've got a great product there, go and stick it on a shelf in a shabby old box and it'll be all right. You've got to do justice, professionalism, presentation, how you communicate, because that's how you're going to be long-term successful and long-term sustainably valuable. So I don't apologize for using branding tools. I think they can be really useful.
Fantastic. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let's switch for a moment and talk about the goals, the objectives, the underlying business models. So the book is just recently out, a couple of months, right? So if we were to go in a time machine and fast forward to a year from now, and it was successful beyond your wildest dreams, what does that mean? Because different people have a different measure of success as it relates to a book. It could be book sales, it could be impact. Like, what does wild success mean for you relative to this book?
Ooh. Well, I think all the things you just mentioned, I'll have those for starters. How about that? So, actually, in all seriousness, the reason why I wrote this book is because I felt I had to and I wanted to, because all the stuff that I've learned over time, and by the way, I'm driving in the rearview mirror here. I have never been particularly good at taking my own advice. And
Hmm.
I've picked many things up on the way. I've made mistakes. We all have. I
Sure.
still do that. But I think that being honest about stuff that we've got right, stuff that we've got wrong, stuff that we've learned, I'd like to share that almost as like a smorgasbord of, tips and lessons and observations and things like that. And people can do their own pick and mix. So
But it sounds like the driver was intrinsic. It wasn't like I'm writing this book to sell 1 million copies so that I could become something else. It was
absolutely.
more the intellectual curiosity, the forcing mechanism. So let's talk about that because some of the obvious goals, book sales, being influencing the conversation, etc. But other things that writing a book does, or from my experience talking to folks, is it forces me to get my thinking clear. It forces me to research. It forces me to really get tight on what this thing is gnawing at me, and it's basically a research project that I get to put light on and share with others.
That's a great way of putting it, gnawing at you. And this book has been gnawing at me for a lot of my later working life when I've been in any way senior. And I would be lying to say I looked at the market thinking, there's a real angle for doing something here. This came out of me, this book. This came
Mm-hmm.
out of me because I thought, I want to help people. I spent a lot of my career recruiting, training, developing, loving people that I work with, and I wanted to see them be brilliant. And in my view, if you don't want to see other people be brilliant, you haven't got the right to call yourself a leader. So everything that I have learned that I've found helpful to do that, I wanted to pour into this book and to make it as honest as I could, because I think in that sense you can help people.
So is it ultimately the book you wish you would have had 25 years ago?
Well, it's so funny you should say that. I have had so much feedback from people who've read it. So whether it's peers or people in middle management and so on, particularly peers who read it and said, I love this. Why didn't I have this when I was 25 years old or 30 years old? So they recognise some of the experiences and they've laughed with me on some of the things. My husband, for example, did a spoof profile. I had a profile in national newspapers that talked about how senior executives cope with stress. Okay. And I think I even started to believe my own responses. I looked at the profile and thought, yeah, of course I believe that. My husband, who actually had to live with me while I was going through all of the, CEO role and things like that, he wrote his own parody profile next, side by side. This is what it's really like. And I thought, that made me laugh. That's something actually I thought was quite interesting to share with other people. And that has, that has resonated with people. So that honesty and some of those lessons, I'm very proud on some of the feedback I've had for people to say, I so got that. I got that. And I love the fact you're open and honest about it. And I'm making notes. I mean, some of the lovely stuff I've had on feedback of people have made highlighted notes and post-it notes for stuff that they want to, use at a later date. So, and that makes me really happy. It makes me honestly feel quite emotional, because doing something that generally helps people, I guess, is something that, most of us want to do. So it's been a labor of love, this book. And I hope,
So let's pivot from love to business. So what, if any, because is the underlying business model, right? Because there's some intrinsic and sort of evangelical, I want to get the message out sort of thing. But is there, or have you toyed with underlying business models in terms of scaling it, leveraging it, monetizing it? In the good old days of pre-COVID, you might have gone out and been a speaker more like in the days when we left our house.
Yeah. Well, in the bad old days of COVID, we're doing much more of the, Zoom calls, virtual conferences. I've done lots of, webcasts and workshops indeed with people virtually and online. And actually the great thing about that is that you can do them immediately. You can do them globally. There are some uses, and in some weird way, this Zoom world that we've been inhabiting has been quite humanizing. You've got pets or children coming in, you've seen people's living rooms or rooms. I think in some ways that's been quite useful. I think as far as I'm concerned on this book and the use of this book, I've had so much feedback saying that was so useful, that was very practical, that was very honest. So I'm hoping that in a year's time, I'm going to be, developing a business that actually helps people with coaching and with mentoring and with some very, very particular tools that I've used over the years that I've found really useful. So I'm hoping in a year's time, I'm going to be helping many, many more people who are decent human beings who might have all the insecurities or imposter syndrome or whatever, to believe that they can run stuff and run it in a way that is human, that's empathetic, because frankly, the world needs quite a lot more of that right now.
So let's talk about the tools for a minute, because I think what happens in many instances is the author, the thought leader, gets overwhelmed, right? So I created this, I wrote this, I need to get this out there, I need to speak about it, I need to promote it. And it's exhausting, right? And there's only so many people that you can touch in a day, even that's over more scalable thing, webinars and all that sort of stuff. So tools are amazing, because if you could codify the content in such a way where you don't need to be, where Rita doesn't need to be in the room or in the Zoom for the ideas to move from person to person and go from 2D, which I would say is a book, to 3D, two smart people having a conversation that's guided through tools to get them to experience things. So tell me about sort of the tool piece of this and why that's such an important way to
Sure. Well, I think what's really interesting, and particularly in knowledge-based businesses, I'm sure you've come across, as indeed I have, people over time who are seriously smart consultants, they do great strategy and things like that, but essentially it becomes a cottage industry.
Sure.
So in my view, the big win, as you were saying, is actually when a business is making money while you sleep.
Yep.
And on that basis, you need to create tools that can be scaled up, that can be industrialized and so on. And increasingly that's possible, as we know, because you can personalize tools, you can use a lot of technology and data in order to be able to do that. So that excites me. And that excites me because you can get to a lot more people than any of us would ever be able to do on webinars or one-on-ones or whatever. So I think the answer is an and, not an either, by the way.
Yeah, and to get to that end, and this I think is a key point, if you can't sort of get it down, get the content down to the molecular level, if it's so dependent on you, and in some instances, if your content is just your life story, it really is dependent on you. If you're an Olympic swimmer or whatever. But once the content can stand on its own, I always say that clients work with us, number one, to make them really relevant, and then number two, to make them totally irrelevant. And you can't be irrelevant if the content's not strong.
I think you're absolutely right. But I think that the other thing we can all do is actually, I guess many of us, we're slight magpies, in the stuff of life or working life, everything else, we pick up tools or techniques, ways of doing stuff, etc. And at some stage, you can put those together with your own, interpretation or whatever, and just think, right, that principle is really important, and I'm going to put that together with that principle, and then I'm going to lift it. And I'm going to make
I think that's a critical point, because I think where people get, both thought leaders and people on the other end, on the buy side, get overwhelmed is when a book promises this is the 3 steps to success, or the 5 things for communications, or all you need to know about presentation skills. And I couldn't agree more with you, is that it's up to the individual to say, that's interesting. That's a tool I'll put in the toolbox. And it's not the tool, the only tool, it's not the Swiss Army knife, but in conjunction with some other things that I've used that I like, that resonate with me, that are valid. And then it's up to me as an adult to say, now would be a good time to use Rita's tool. Now would be a good time to use situational leadership. Now,
Totally. And I think, again, there have been times when I've sat in courses for maybe 2 or 3 days, and I get ping moments, those ping moments. God, I'm going to do that. So it's a silly example. In communication and presentation, I was on a presentation skills course, and I saw myself on video. I mean, isn't that the first horrifying moment for so many people, where you see yourself for the first time, you think, why do I flap my hands in that way, or why does my head go in that direction?
Right.
Very, very revealing on the understanding of yourself, as we know. And on this course, what this guy said was steady eye contact. When you're presenting to an audience, steady eye contact. You almost need to count to 4 before you leave someone's face and go to somebody else. Because actually, if you glance around the room, it looks as though you're seeking approval, or or you don't quite know what you do. It seems completely obvious, but it's not obvious until you know. And there are just certain things, again, ping moments, where you think, actually, that was helpful to me. And whenever I shared that with somebody else, they've gone, that made a huge difference. And picking some of these things up and then finding, as I say, your own unique combination that really helps you. That's what I think is the tool. That's what's possible in the digital world, with all the data that we've got and the individualization possibilities.
And you have to be aware enough to go, there's an awkward phase when you're trying, say, that 4-second rule, when you're so thinking about it, you're like, oh my God, does this person think I'm staring them down? You know, what it's so conscious and awkward and funky and whatever. And then you do it enough and you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. It becomes the habit.
Now, this is a really interesting thing. And that's, when people say, one of the chapters in the book is called Why You Don't Have to Fake It to Make It.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I feel so strongly about that is the minute you think about faking it, you're thinking about a third-party construct. Do you know what I mean? So something over there, a corporate
and the validation that comes with that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas, we can be who we are and learn some of these techniques that give you confidence to present, that give you the confidence, for example, knowing the finance and the numbers. You've got to really beat yourself up to make sure you know this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are tools that you can use, absolutely, that will give you confidence, not fake the confidence. And I think there's a really, really important distinction between those two. And I think that we all need to keep on talking about, making the best of yourself.
Excellent.
I find the general advice, be yourself, a bit concerning, only that I think there are some certain aspects of ourselves that maybe we don't necessarily want to parade out all the time. I think we're talking
I would say be yourself, asterisk, unless you're an ass or a jerk.
Exactly. Or otherwise, be yourself. Have your id under control.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a lot of people in the world at the moment, business world and otherwise, who I'm going to be myself. I'm just going to say what I like. They've got their id completely out of control.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? You've got to get the broader sense of you doing the best thing, because frankly, the world needs the best of you and all the people who can be human, empathetic leaders, because that's good for you. It's good for your organisation. And frankly, it's good for seeing a world that's not going to get blown to smithereens. Ideally.
And on that note, I will thank you for joining us today. That's a great place to land. So thank you so much for your time. I wish you the best with the book, and thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thanks so much. It's been great talking to you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.